Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. This is the account with the news for day 354 on the war in Ukraine. Today was again a rather quiet day. I grouped the minor updates into the usual situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and the international developments. First up, the flashpoints along the front. Kreminna. Russian units made some gains around Kreminna, especially towards Torske, where geolocated footage shows Russian units close to the settlement. Ukraine reported repelled attacks around Torske and Bilohorivka. Bakhmut. Ukraine reported repelled attacks around Bakhmut, Ivanivske, and Chasiv Yar. Yevgeny Prigozhin claimed Wagner units captured Krasnahora today. A photo of Wagner mercenaries in front of the city sign was shared online. However, the General Staff of Ukraine reported in the morning that Russia shelled Krasnahora, indicating at least the presence of Ukrainian forces there. During the filming of a news report for the German Bild newspaper, military correspondent Paul Ronsheimer and his colleagues came under mortar fire in Bakhmut. The dramatic scenes show the journalists running for cover after the shells exploded close by. Since the video report is 2 minutes long, I included a link in the description. A Ukrainian commander with a call sign Magyar said that Bakhmut will be closed off to civilians, journalists and aid workers starting tomorrow. Vuhledar. There are no changes in the situation here. However, I wanted to share this interesting thread with several satellite images on Twitter by a Ukrainian military officer about Vuhledar. And to start the news segment, a look at all the minor news out of Ukraine. During the evening, Vitaly Kim, head of the Mykolaiv Oblast Military Administration, and Mykola Lukashuk, head of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast Council, warned that Russia launched several Shahed drones at the city of Dnipro. Later, the Ukrainian Air Force refuted the claims about Shahed drones and said Russia launched a reconnaissance drone and balloons with reflectors instead. The Defense Minister of Ukraine, Austin-Reznikov, stated that the defense forces of Ukraine deprived the Russian invaders of the chance to attack Odesa from the sea by robbing it of its dominance in the Black Sea. According to Viktor Lyashko, Minister of Health of Ukraine, the medical infrastructure has suffered significantly in the full-scale Russian invasion, with 1,218 healthcare institutions damaged. In particular, 540 hospitals were partially destroyed and 173 were completely ruined. Up to $1 billion are needed to restore medical facilities to the state they were in before February 24, 2022. The Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Reintegration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories, Irina Vereshchuk, called the deliberate draining of the Kakhovka Reservoir an environmental war. It is suggested Russian forces, who feared Ukrainian troops might try to force the Dnipro River, opened the water locks in an attempt to prevent this. Mariana Reva, the spokeswoman of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, announced that now more than 27,000 volunteers have signed up for the offensive guard and that the formation of additional brigades is planned. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. The Russian occupation authorities in Mariupol have started to demolish and recycle damaged houses, which they refuse to rebuild, into concrete chips used in road construction. The mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, reported that Russian authorities have brought in judges from Russia to hold trials in occupied Melitopol. One case he pointed out was a woman who donated to the armed forces of Ukraine. She has been found guilty and is awaiting the sentence. Fedorov also called to mind that there are 5 known torture chambers set up in Melitopol. Russian companies have begun operating local branch offices in the occupied Luhansk Oblast and are quickly absorbing local competitors. For example, the State Bank of the Luhansk People's Republic has recently merged with a Russian bank. Russian authorities have also announced that a single mobile network provider is to be created in all occupied territories. According to the Berdiansk city military administration, the occupation police has fired warning shots at pensioners who broke down the door to the post office. It is reported that people queued since midnight to receive their payments, and in the morning a large crowd assembled and broke down the door. Photos from the ongoing repair work at the Kerch Bridge were shared today online on Twitter. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. The representative of the main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Vadim Skibitsky, said in an interview that the Russian command is forced to postpone the new wave of mobilization because it has not yet been able to train the conscripts during the first wave. Several articles with uncensored anti-Kremlin headlines about Russia's war against Ukraine were briefly published on the website of Russian propaganda tabloid Komsomolskaya Pravda. Headlines of the articles posted included "Putin orders the killing of civilians in Ukraine" and "EU creates tribunal in The Hague for trial of Putin." And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. Oleksiy Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, has claimed that Chechenian forces who were deployed in Ukraine are currently working as emergency workers in Turkey, and it is possible that they will be deployed to Moldova after. The Ministers of Defense of Ukraine and the United States, Oleksiy Reznikov and Lloyd Austin, held a telephone conversation to discuss the priorities of next week's Rammstein-style meeting. In particular, the supply of air defense equipment and artillery to Ukraine. According to the Chief of Staff, Deputy Commander of the Ground Forces, Lieutenant General Oleksandr Pavlyuk, Ukrainian soldiers currently in the UK are receiving training on providing first aid on the battlefield, as well as how to operate as a unit and conduct offensive and defensive operations. The Swiss bank Credit Suisse has frozen over $19 billion in Russian money, which amounts to about 1/3 of all declared Russian assets in the country. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting as usual with the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense. Over the past 2 weeks, Russia has likely suffered its highest rate of casualties since the first week of the invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian General Staff released daily statistics on Russian casualties. Although defense intelligence cannot verify Ukraine's methodology, the trends the data illustrate are likely accurate. The mean average for the last 7 days was 824 casualties per day, over 4 times the rate reported over June to July 2022. Ukraine also continues to suffer a high attrition rate. The uptick in Russian casualties is likely due to a range of factors, including lack of trained personnel, coordination, and resources across the front. This is exemplified in Vuhledar and Bakhmut. The UK Ministry of Defense also published this graphic showing the trend of casualties. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The researchers noted that all Russian formations so far observed were rendered combat ineffective in earlier phases of the war and have very likely been reconstituted with mobilized personnel. The Russian military appears to have been unable to prepare its mobilized personnel to conduct effective mechanized offensive operations in the short period of time since their call-ups. They added that Ukrainian military officials and Russian pro-war nationalist voices are downplaying Russia's ability to launch a sweeping large-scale offensive in the Donetsk region in the current circumstances of the Russian armed forces. The reported culmination and tactical failures around Vuhledar, Donetsk Oblast of Russian forces have likely further weakened the Russian ultra-nationalist community's belief that Russian forces are able to launch a decisive military effort, the institute said. The Russian military is unlikely to be able to scale its approach from the Bakhmut area to the wider theater of war because the tactics it is using in Bakhmut are more suited to dense urban environments, and because Russian forces lack the number of elite formations needed to conduct a larger offensive in eastern Ukraine in the same fashion. The Russian military command is deploying its most elite units to the Bakhmut area in smaller formations using urban infiltration tactics, according to the limited footage of Russian tactics in the area that the Institute has observed. Russian offensive operations along other front lines have so far resulted in marginal advances without operational significance. Additionally, the researchers write that Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner PMC, is trying to salvage his declining influence as the Kremlin has begun to sideline him and his forces further. Prigozhin confirmed the expiration of an agreement to recruit convicts with an unnamed agency, which most likely was the Russian Ministry of Defense. The Institute points at parallels between the decline and current rhetoric of Prigozhin and Igor Girkin, who enjoyed the Kremlin's support until he as well was sidelined. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The Russian Federation does not abandon its intentions to destroy the critical infrastructure of our country and continues to damage civilian objects and homes of the civilian population. The threat of further Russian strikes on civilian objects remains high throughout Ukraine. Do not ignore air raid signals. The enemy is concentrating its main efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Novopavlivka directions. The enemy is strengthening its troops in the Liman and Bakhmut directions and actively uses aviation to target the position of our troops. The enemy does not stop terrorizing the inhabitants of the territories temporarily occupied by him in the Kherson region. This time, the most vulnerable strata, pensioners, came under pressure. The enemy is forcing them to get Russian passports, threatening to stop paying any pensions. And that concludes the report for day 354. Should you be interested in any of the articles, you can find the links in the description as usual. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.